Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, we team up to have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor or leader in the field that we think you should be learning from, because we know that there is great wisdom to be shared from these important spaces. We like to have a conversation that is generally uplifting. That's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom. We want to give you a little bit of their insights and perspective, but on a Monday, so keep it as positive as possible. That's why we call it Weekly Wisdom.
And the show's brought to you by Mainstay, the student engagement and retention platform that is distinguishable from a lot of other companies in ed tech, because they prove their work through peer-reviewed research. Mainstay is best known for its work with Georgia Tech, where it helped reduce summer melt by more than 20%. And also helped the university retain 1,200 students. You can check out Mainstay's work and the peer-reviewed research at mainstay.com.
I think they also worked at Georgia State. If they did work at Georgia Tech,
I'm sorry. Did I say Georgia Tech?
I'm telling
Drew. So sorry. Georgia State.
No, but fun fact is the upcoming UIA National Summit. We had lots of companies that reached out that wanted to try and sponsor the summit, but our rule was that your product had to have evidence that it actually worked on a UIA campus. And so there are actually only two that we have as corporate sponsors that met the threshold of those who had reached out, and that was NAC, the kind of Uber for tutors, and Mainstay. So I'm going to get a chance to see Drew and tell him that you think he should work with Georgia Tech.
That's great. And I'm actually going to see Drew at the ACRO meeting in Boston next month. Nice. Anyway, back to you.
The other part we were going to share is that this show is also broadcast on the Innovating Together podcast, which many of you listen on, and that is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, who we are very grateful for their generous investment. But today, now we get a chance to hear from an incredible guest. I'll bring her on now.
Yes. Sonia Christian is Chancellor of the California Community Colleges System. Before she took that job over in 2023, I believe, she was Chancellor of the Kern Community College District and of Bakersfield College, which was the president of Bakersfield College before that. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, happy Monday morning, all. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. And so, Chancellor Christian, you and I have met what feels like 100 years ago, back in Oregon, when we were working on an innovation, collaborative, statewide kind of envisioning work project that you were coming from Lane Community College at the time, and I was at the university system office. And now I'm just like, it has been such a pleasure to watch the impact that you've created. And it was just like, it's one of those times where you see someone who's just, killing it. And you're like, I actually met that person from a prior life. So that has been lovely to see. And for folks at home who don't know you, if you want to share a little bit about your journey, how you ended up finding yourself in this unique spot.
Yeah, well, I feel the same way about you, Bridget. So long ago, when we were on this Skunk Works team in Oregon, solving all the problems. And here you are, doing what you do for higher ed in our nation. Actually grew up in India, went to a Catholic high school, did college, and came to the United States for grad school, and fell in love with community colleges. I remember when I went back home to India during the first winter break, I described community colleges as a uniquely American invention. And in fact, Bakersfield College sponsored me for my green card, huge. Became a faculty member, taught math, and then went to Oregon for a short stint when I met you, and then came back as president at BC. And unbelievable. I've got 1 year under my belt as the Chancellor of the California Community Colleges. the largest system, and just feeling a sense of privilege to be in this role and do work at this time in higher education.
That's fantastic. I didn't know your full story there, and what a full circle moment that had to be to become the president of Bakersfield. That's just that's wild. That's an incredible story. So I'm also guessing that you learned quite a bit along the way, working with a variety of leaders and through a variety of experiences, probably many good and many bad, that have shaped who you are as a leader. One of the things our audience is interested in is kind of your leadership style and what or who most significantly kind of created it. What has most strongly informed your leadership style?
You know, I just got back late last night from Toronto. I was visiting my daughter. And on the flight back, I was, remembering, my life coming to the US as a graduate student. And it seems that, I've had this series of hellos and goodbyes that have really shaped a lot of who I am. I remember, when I left the airport in India and would go back and forth to see my family and then come back to initially do my grad school and then onto my work life. It felt every time I sort of landed in the airport, was excited. And then every time I left, I would cry up a rainstorm of tears. In fact, there was one time when I was crying so much on the flight back to California that I was moved to the business class from economy because, the person felt really sorry for me. But I say this because this experience of, each hello really requires a sense of openness to embrace the new, the unfamiliar, new people, places, experiences. And it, I think, nurtures, our ability as leaders or human beings to connect, to find joy in the present. It also gives perspective not to kind of dilly-dally because a moment might just be fleeting, and to take full advantage of it. And the goodbyes for me are still extremely difficult, including the one yesterday. But I found that it helped me hone in the skills of how to move forward and still keep the joy of discovery alive and the wisdom of lessons learned. I mean, you probably have experienced it as in the jobs that you have done, that as leaders, we manage loss, we manage uncertainty, and we're always dealing with change. So this experience has really helped me, understand myself and understand others over time. I do want to mention a person, though, I have to, and that's my mom, Pam. She has passed since. She had like the strong belief that anything is possible. Absolutely extraordinary woman, just full of life and a great storyteller. She never did go to college. She raised 4 children. I was the youngest. But my mom, Pam, she always found a path forward, even when it seemed it was absolutely impossible. And now looking back, I would say that, if I were to give language to the skills, the qualities she had, she was extremely resourceful. She was extremely persistent, tenacious. She had grit. And I use the word grit because those of us in the community college circles, maybe the California community colleges, we often use the word grit to try to instill that grit in our students. And I've sort of learned from my mom that, navigating extremely turbulent waters and finding a safe path forward was extremely important, because those turbulent waters always happen in life, and it happens in our roles that we play, in the different roles we play, because I believe that leadership is really at every level of the organization. So really can't tell you the number of times I see, my mom and me, and in so many leaders, when they have to weather difficult storms. And this is exactly what we teach our students, particularly our first generation students, to develop these skills of resilience and being able to adapt. And I'm just rambling on now, so I'll punt it back to you, Bridget.
I think that's great. I love the weaving together kind of your past and your mom sounded like an incredible person. I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah. Well, and it sounded like, what you were describing, the way you described her, a lot of those words, and I'm glad you went there, are used to describe community colleges, right? The institutions themselves, resourceful, figuring out, finding ways of moving on beyond moving beyond sort of challenge and so I'm curious what it's interesting that you sort of fell in love with community colleges, having been in a country that, like many of the countries around the world, sort of don't have them. And I'm curious sort of what it was about the institutions that sort of captured your imagination and made you want to be there. And was that a surprise? Like, how did that happen exactly?
Well, first of all, Doug, I'm so glad that Bridget teamed up with you, and I've been following your work for a long time and have been deeply inspired. So community colleges, what's not to love about community colleges? I know when I came to the US, I had not experienced the concept of open access for anyone and for everyone who wanted to try higher education, right? First time, second time, for the student who from high school wanted something close to home and then transfer out to a university, and for that worker who needed to come back and retool. And I had a hard time wrapping my mind around the idea of open access. And so that's what first sort of captivated me, the hope and the dream. And I made up my mind pretty much in my first semester of grad school as a foreign student that I wanted to be in a community college, but I saw myself as being a math faculty. I didn't see myself necessarily being an administrator, let alone in a position that now has tremendous influence on policy reform for a state where we impact over 2.1 million students. So you will see in the work that I'm even currently doing within the California community colleges, we established this plan called Vision 2030, the roadmap for California community colleges. And you will see that we bring back the concept of open access back in a very visible way. Because for a period of time, we thought of ourselves, well, we're open access. We accepted that, and then we moved to, but do we actually get students to complete a degree or certificate, right? How do we focus on the completion agenda? And we spent a lot of time focusing on the completion agenda. And in Vision 2030, we bring back the concept of access, and then we say, well, yeah, we're 2.1 million students, but we can't really say we are open access if there are 6.8 million Californians who are stuck in low-income jobs and have not found their way to higher education. So we really start bringing the idea of open access and what does reform and redesign of the California community colleges look like when we have to do access at scale and with equity. So it's safe to say that I fell in love then, and I continue to be in love with the California community colleges and the community colleges across the state of America. And I think now many of the other countries are bringing in the concept of community colleges into their portfolio of higher education.
Great. So given that vantage point, I have a feeling I might suspect the answer, but I'm wondering if you wanted to speak to briefly the changes that you think are most needed in higher education, given sitting in the seat that you are in as a system chancellor, having already been a president, you understand the real tension there between the local challenges and then now the policy landscape. And I'm just curious about, you probably have some thoughts about the broader sector.
Yeah. So, right now, I sort of mentioned that a problem that we are grappling with within the community colleges in higher ed as a whole, and it is a topic that we're talking about in California and under the umbrella of the Career Education Master Plan for the state of California, which includes our CSUs, our University of California, as well as our private and independent colleges and universities. It is the concept of the economic and social prosperity of our nation. It depends on an educated population, and there are some tensions on conversations related to, well, does skill building really require higher education? What is the value of a degree? And in that whole context, my belief is that it is a false dichotomy to think that skills building is on one side and is mutually exclusive from higher education and the academy. I think it really needs to be integrated, specifically even given the context of emerging technologies that are coming our way in such a fast-paced way. When you talk about AI and generative AI playing a significant role in impacting the workforce of every industry sector. And without access, I believe, to education that can prepare individuals to work alongside and to manage these technologies, vast portions of our population could find themselves economically disadvantaged. So it is a partnership amongst each other, collaboration, but also with our industry segments and looking at how we can recognize industry skills. I believe that higher education leaders cannot be complacent at this time, that all of us, and when I say leaders, I mean faculty leaders, I mean chancellors and presidents, that we must all actively work to make educational opportunities accessible to those who have been traditionally underserved. I mean, think about the example I gave, right? To go from 2 million to 6.8 million is not an easy feat. We must collaborate, and we must also harness technology. We must create flexible, affordable pathways that account for the diverse need of adult learners, for low-income students, and those from marginalized communities. And it involves partnerships like we have never seen before. I'm cautiously optimistic about AI, for example. If you ask me the question of whether AI could potentially be something that could cause concern, I can give you a list of things we need to be thinking about. But for today, let me focus on how AI could be an asset in solving problems of scale and with equity. State systems like the California community colleges can develop innovative educational models, tailored learning experiences, and skills-based assessment. And all of this is really braiding or integrating what is considered, traditional. Okay, it happens in the industry, like Google's and NVIDIA's create these skills-based certificates or apprenticeships. If you're talking about more construction trades or apprenticeships within the healthcare sector. But how do we bring it into what our currency of higher ed, where we talk about credits for courses, and we are also looking at competency-based learning pathways as well. But how do we integrate apprenticeships and look at the mapping towards an associate's degree? And I'll wrap up by saying that although the California community colleges are focused on skills-based and workforce development, I personally believe in the power of general education, the arts and the humanities, and social sciences. So that's where you bring in the degree, right? You sort of bring in that delta of general education to create an individual who is not only looking at economic prosperity, but looking at being able to engage in our society. And we all know that our country and the world needs civic engagement and a commitment to social progress for everyone in a very practical manner. So I'll wrap up my comments with that and turn it back to you.
Yeah. Probably want to pivot at this time to talk a little bit about a little bit more about your development as a leader. What can you sort of characterize for us, sort of what you consider to be the sort of proudest moment of your career so far as a leader?
Well, as I get more seasoned and older in my role, I have actually come to cherish people and see individuals around me. And this is why it was so fantastic to run into Bridget in Washington, D.C. We were both participating in a conversation at the White House, and just remember, the work we had done years ago, and now where we are in the work we're moving. And it goes for all of my colleagues and people that I read about and see that evolution. If you're talking about a piece of work or a body of work that I have personally advanced, I would say Guided Pathways is a body of work that I believe has the flexibility for higher ed to adopt and to norm with language. The Guided Pathways framework is really built on 4 simple pillars. It just says very simply that we need to be very clear as higher education with what these academic pathways are that are connected and lead from one segment to the other and to the job, so that it's not these dead end or silos with which we work. The second pillar talks about really being in tune with our learners so that they have, the ability to start strong. And then number 3 is to support them in their pathways, and then to ensure that their learning is deep and rich, things like work-based learning, for example. And what I've come to appreciate about this framework is its flexibility, and it's almost foundational and fundamental in developing policy and practice. So, for example, when I'd started this work, I was a newly minted president at Bakersfield College, and we implemented it within the boundaries of our college in really creating that clarity for our students and supporting them, embracing them, and making sure they complete that degree or certificate. And then we expanded it outside the walls of the college to dual enrollment when we were getting into high school. So this framework, we were able to adapt the 4 pillars to work with high school students. And then we adapted it when in California, prison education was legislated in 2014. And now that same adaptation from dual enrollment, prison education, we are utilizing it for all of California's community colleges to deal with the working adult population that I mentioned earlier in some of my comments. And, our system has developed the fluency of how to implement guided pathways. And we have the language, which is, again, critical, to develop common language for organizations and for systems and for intersegmental systems to work together if we want to move work at scale and with equity.
That's really well. In general, it all totally resonates. Especially, I was thinking about the pieces about the careers that you've touched, the policies that you've taking ownership of guided pathways in such a significant way, and having pride of that, but also like the people that you've worked with. I think that's the right answer, because it feels like it's the people part in particular really resonates. But I also feel like that there's got to be some particular topic that it needs to have a champion. It needs to have somebody who's actually going to be committed for the long haul, and not just like because it's a passing fancy. And I love that you have grabbed onto this one. I wanted to, as we wrap, we now turn to the rapid fire portion of the agenda. So the first piece we want to know from you is about about the advice that you've received that has been most significant in your career. Who gave you the advice that, for you is the best advice that you've received or you consistently reach back to, and we're interested in who gave it.
So I think a single thing that I have learned is about the power of commitment. And, along the way, right from my parents to various individuals have talked about it, but when it crystallized for me was through this story that you've heard this story, I know. In 1955, a small woman, 5'3", 42 years old, boarded the Cleveland bus of the Montgomery City line, and she walked past the first section and sat down directly behind the partition that separated the white seating from the black. And as it happened, the white section filled up, and 3 more travelers boarded, and the driver, James Blake, moved the partition back 1 row. You know where I'm going with this. And then he asked the 4 black passengers to give up their seats and move to the back. And all 4 passengers got up. And 3 of them moved back. The small woman sat back down by the window. And James Blake told her again to move, and she calmly said no. When he threatened to have her arrested, she quietly replied, "You may." But when asked later about her actions, Rosa Parks said, "I felt a determination cover my body like a quilt on a winter night." And that story it comes back, and I say it at every opportunity that I can. And you can see that I'm saying the story back again, because I think it really imprints on people that we've got to come back, and do what we have to do when we're moving an agenda. And it's the commitment that makes the miracle happen.
That's great. Beyond that story and how it's affected you, I'm also curious about when younger people or people who are earlier in their career, when they reach out to you and they ask for advice about navigating, their careers and otherwise, what advice do you find yourself most frequently giving to people who are coming behind you?
Yeah. I go back to awareness, when I'm talking to my colleagues and young individuals who are grappling with life and with work, and leaders. It's about self-awareness, awareness of the situation, getting to know yourself and to be in tune with how you are and who you're evolving to be. I also say, take time to give language to understanding who you are. You have an instinct, take time to give language to what that instinct means. You're feeling uncomfortable, take time to give language to what it means. And when I talk about self-awareness, it's not about being selfish, but it's more about being open, honest, understanding of yourself. And I believe that awareness and mindfulness is like a muscle, and it gets stronger with experience and with intentional practice. I am a lifelong student of this practice, and I see that evolution, and I encourage others to do the same as well.
Great. Doug, you have your last one. You are muted.
Yeah, so we often sort of close with asking people if there's a particular leadership book or a book that has influenced your leadership, even if it's not necessarily formally considered a leadership book. But is there some guidance that you've gleaned from that's really sort of helped drive you forward in your career?
Yeah, well, recently the go-to book that I've been sharing is Sapiens by Noah Yuval Harari. It came out in 2011-ish. And I read it much later when I was president of Bakersfield College, and more, it's kind of my go-to. And in *Sapiens*, Harari explains that large-scale human cooperation, it was made possible, that is singularly, the cooperation is singularly what made the human species survive and thrive, and the dominant species over the millennia. And it's the ability to create a shared story, a shared myths, and a collective sense of beliefs, which creates the order necessary. Now, with all of what is happening, Harari's argument about human cooperation, I feel, is even more pertinent today. I mentioned AI and the geopolitical tensions that we are facing. It's reshaping global dynamics. AI's rapid advancement requires shared ethical frameworks, regulations, and collaboration that is so essential. The tensions, not just from the wars, but from climate crisis and the politics that we find ourselves in. All of this highlights the need for a unified global response. And I think higher ed has to take this on. We are increasingly interconnected. Problems like cybersecurity, climate change, economic instability demands cooperation on an unprecedented scale. We must develop shared narratives, whether about progress, human rights, or our collective security. I think this is extremely critical, and I think Harari's *Sapiens*, every time I read it and reread it again, it brings upon the urgency that I want every person in a leadership role to understand the importance of cooperation as a fundamental ingredient in building structures and cultures of the organizations that they find themselves leading.
That's great. Well, I have that book and I have not fully read it. I've skimmed parts of it. So now I feel like you've made like an incredible case for how I need to actually pick it back up. Thank you so much for that. And I love as someone who lives in the collaboration space, I love that framing. And so I will follow up and I will actually read it. Well, thank you, Chancellor. This has been really lovely to hear more about your story, more about the things that you are passionate about, and also just the unique vantage point I think that you bring to the work, given where you have come from, but also like I think the vantage point that you sit at, the altitude of the role that you're in, and that you brought in this perspective from having been a campus president as well. I just think it's a really rich perspective. So thank you for sharing that generously with our audience today.
Well, thank you so much, Bridget, and thank you, Doug, and we'll talk soon.
Great. And Doug, I feel like we got to give a little acknowledgement that you made a big announcement, and our listeners might be a little surprised that you didn't break the news here, but anything you want to share, if you want to come off mute for a second and break the news, I guess.
Just said publicly last week that I'll be living inside higher ed at the end of this calendar year, after 20 years, nice round number, and ready to figure out other ways to hopefully try and make some kind of difference in and around higher education. So a new little twist in my journey. So looking forward to it.
It's lovely to see you kind of in this new phase, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. Also, I do think that the round numbers are nice, right? Like you wait till 21, 22, it's just less cool,
right?
So it's like it's a weird pressure. So that doesn't mean we're going to stop hanging out, and we're going to have to leverage all of that deep wisdom that you're tapping into now in this next chapter. So I think that we're all very grateful for everything that you've done, and we're excited to see what you're going to do next.
It's been fun.
All right.
Anyway,
Well,
thank you, Dr. Christian. Yep.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.